Hi, my name is Vivian. Today I'm doing to the rebuttal speech to the claim of fact that there are faults in United States government system causing political participation to be an all-time low. Recording to the advocate's first minor claim, government officials had given its citizens reason to mistrust their credibility. My challenge for the evidence is that the evidence lack of data and might be overgeneralizing. Since working records and approval rating exist in archive, having those numbers would better serve the claimant. My challenge for the reasoning is that the supporting evidence and the first secondary claim does not provide correlation, statistics, or causation to the primary claim that voter turnout is lower. So it turns out my counterclaim for the first minor claim is that there are more people voting during the time of conflict. For example, there are more people voting when there's a war or there's a political scandal. According to Michael Koch, professor from Texas A&M University, and Stephen P. Nicholson, professor from UC Mercer, in their article, Death and Turnout, the human causes of war and voter participation in democracy, that they found strong support for the hypothesis that higher casualty increased turnout, both at aggregate and individual levels of analysis, controlling for a variety of alternative explanations, and aggregate results demonstrate that the effect of casualty on voter turnout is pervasive across the family of established democracies. To summarize that, basically is when people die in a conflict, for example, a Vietnam War, more people voted. The voting rate didn't go down because when there's a mistrust on government credibility, people tend to vote more because they want to make some change. To the advocate's second minor claim, it says voter identification laws prevent voting participation. So my challenge to the evidence is, I think the evidence has good credibility source. However, the lack of statistics makes the claim not convincing. Also, the evidence is all generalizing because states have different voter identification laws and the effects can be varied. But the advocate did not clarify that, including in her speech. Also, to the reasoning challenge, the conclusion of this secondary claim makes it seem like voting on Tuesday is a law that prevents voting participation, when there are multiple ways to vote besides showing up on Tuesday. You can vote by mail and then many other ways. My counterclaim is that I agree with this claim, but only this claim, that voting identification laws did reduce voting participation. However, I don't think the reasoning and then the evidence is strong enough to support her argument. To the final minor claim is presidential campaigning for the last 2 decades limit our democratic system. I don't have any challenge for the evidence, but for the reasoning is the advocate did not provide enough reasoning and data to make the connection to more spending equals to less voting participation. There's no relevance to the between the reasoning and then to the claim. So my counterclaim is that election campaign spending has minimal effect on voter turnout, but does not decrease it. According to Robert E. Hogan, professor from Louisiana State University, in his article, Campaign Spending and Voter Participation in States Legislative Election, The findings demonstrate the campaign spending has a strong influence on voter participation. However, the effect is mitigated by contextual feature. Legislative perfectionism reduce the influence of spending, while the presence of high stimulus statewide election enhance it. In addition, challenger spending is more effective at stimulating participation than incumbent spending. Also, according to George L. Spankham, professor for Northwestern University, in his article, Political Advertising and Election Results, we find no evidence that the advertising had an impact on overall turnout. In the aggregate, the mobilizing and demobilizing effects of political ads tend to cancel out. They may help to explain why a large number of previous studies have detected only minimal or even no effects. So, to conclude my rebuttal speech, I think the advocate made some good points on her claim of fact, but the reasoning and then the evidence base need to be improved and they need to be more persuasive and convincing. Thank you very much.
All right, structurally everything's easy to follow. I do want to go to the end. At the end, it makes it sound like it's a critique as opposed to a refutation, so you want to be a little bit careful about that. You can tell from the way that you've structured your responses that you're following this template that I put up for you, and I'm going to try and emphasize again that you're not required to have something in each of those categories. It's just a reminder of what the possible answers are on those points. It would be, I think, a little bit clearer to just go with the direct claims and then tell me what your claim is. Now, sometimes I do think it does incentivize people to look at the evidence and the reasoning a little bit more, which is why I include that in the process. And I thought that you did that a little bit. You suggested problems with evidence occasionally, and you frequently suggested that they were jumping to conclusions based on a limited amount of information, or there was an absence of statistical information to support a particular position, and I thought that that was fine. I thought that you did a good job on the counterclaims, telling me what your counterclaim was, and also providing evidence to support your position. What you need to do a little bit more of is kind of summarize that. I thought that you did that pretty well at the beginning, at the end of the first point, where you say the voting rates don't really decrease because voters are offended, or because some controversy is going on, or because it's divisive. In fact, the opposite is true. Voting participation rate goes up when there's divisiveness. So it's like the exact opposite conclusion of what the advocate's talking about. On the second point, after having criticized the lack of statistical evidence and suggesting that different ID laws work in different ways and that there are multiple ways that people can vote, you then turn around and agree that, well, voter ID laws probably do reduce participation, which seems a little bit strange given all of the arguments that you just presented. The notion that people are lower their participation because of some barrier to voting needs to be documented. And like you said on the first point, when you were talking about a lack of statistical correlation on that first point, I'm waiting for the statistical information on this. I don't get it from the negative position or the opposite position that you're taking, and you're willing to accept their position, and I don't remember what evidence they provided to suggest that that was in fact happening. On the third point, you basically said, well, you don't have any problem with the evidence, and you basically suggest that the reasoning issue is maybe not particularly problematic, but you do have counterclaims that reach opposite conclusions. So there's got to be some explanation for why that is the case. Maybe they didn't provide sufficient evidence, or maybe they're talking about something different and don't define it clearly as to what it is you're talking about. But I thought you had pretty good information here that shows that spending is largely outside of the purview of participation in the process. It might influence how people vote, but it doesn't influence whether or not they vote. And that seemed like you had two good pieces of information to support that position. All right, thank you.